One of the questions that we're getting all the time now is, why are we doing these conferences? Because they're extremely time consuming. You have no idea how time consuming they are. And to be very honest, if I knew how time consuming they are, I might not have started doing these things. But the reality is they have to happen. And it's not because it's fun, it's not because it's easy. There's really only one reason that we have to do this, and it's because of the animals. That's the only reason. The bottom line is that eventually, at some point, we have to end animal experimentation. That's the only reason to do this, that's why we're here, and that's why we're going to keep doing these conferences as long as it takes. Animal experimentation has to end because it deprives animals of their freedom, their identity, and their very lives. In using non-human primates as experimental subjects, we are proclaiming what has to be the ultimate in egocentricity. We are proclaiming very loudly that human beings are more important than absolutely anything else. And that's just plain wrong. We are no more important than other species. We are animals just like they are. And we must not be fooled. Despite what the medical research industry tells us, there is absolutely no way that animal experimentation can be done humanely. It is not possible. Because in many instances, the worst thing we do to these animals is quite simply putting them in the cage in the first place. It gets worse after that, but that is one of the most horrible things we can do, to take animals that are used to living in trees and make them live in stainless steel boxes. And it's no different for the dogs, the cats, the guinea pigs, the rats or mice, sheep, goats, or the dozens of other species that end up in laboratories. They are imprisoned, they are cut, they are burned, they are electrically shocked, they are deprived of food and water. If you can't think of a horrible thing to do to an animal, I can probably find you a research study that's doing that right now. If you can, in your wildest dreams, come up with the most sadistic, the most painful way to torture an animal, it's probably happening. We're talking about irradiation. We're talking about chemical weapons, biological weapons. I read about a study once that took baboons, removed 1/3 of their blood volume, and then centrifuged them. And your dollars paid for it. But like I was saying, even the experimentation isn't often the worst thing that happens to them. Because we have to think about this. We're not talking about single animals. Literally, entire civilizations of non-human primates are caged. Not a family, not an individual, social groups in the thousands. Not only are they caged, they're never even allowed to see what they should have had as a natural life. They see no sunlight. They breathe no fresh air. Trees, vines, and grass are replaced by stainless steel and fluorescent lights. Running and jumping and playing outside are replaced by pacing in cages, rocking back and forth, and biting their own arms and legs. We take away their freedom, we take away their minds, and we take away their bodies. We reduce their lives in the final analysis to nothing more than ID numbers and experimental statistics. And I know this is true because I've seen it. This is what I live with on a daily basis. We're not talking about single animals or single instances of abuse. if every piece of information I had was printed on a single page that talked about an animal that was being abused, that stack of paper could not fit in this building. It would fill this entire room and this entire piece of property and likely this entire city. That's how bad it is. And the law that we are told protects animals. It's a tool that we can use, but it is an utter failure on a scale which is totally unprecedented. The majority of animals receive no protection. The majority of animals in laboratories legally aren't even called animals. We don't know quite exactly what they are because they breathe, they eat, they sleep, they suffer, they die, but somehow that's not an animal. And even the ones that are covered by the law fare no better, because the experimenters themselves and their cronies at work get to decide what happens to these animals. They get to approve the water deprivation, the social isolation, the cramped cages, maybe not even cleaning the cages as often as they're supposed to be done. That's what is allowed to happen. Incompetent staff neglect to take primates out of cages, and they're literally, when they go through a cage washer, these animals are literally boiled alive. We recently found about an instance at the University of California, Davis, where a researcher sealed mice in a plastic bag and left them sitting on the counter until they died. You've heard me talk about a laboratory called Santa Cruz Biotech. You saw the pictures. They simply allow animals to become so sick and ill for lack of adequate veterinary care that they die. There's nothing else they can do because they don't notice these animals are ill or they don't care. Their treatment of choice apparently is euthanasia. And that's even the wrong word. It's not euthanasia. It's murder. Food and water deprivation is common. Confinement in restraint chairs for primates is common. Electric shock is used. Animals are denied anesthesia. Like I said before, if you can think of a way to abuse an animal, it's probably done in a laboratory somewhere. Like I said, there is no such thing as humane animal experimentation, and anybody that tells you anything different is quite simply lying to you. Who do the animals have to turn to? The USDA is virtually powerless. They can issue a fine, but for a laboratory with a $100 million budget, a $5,000 fine, you might as well fine them a quarter. It has about as much effect. So who's left? Who's going to fight for these animals? There's only one answer to that. It's us. Because we're all they have. Together, we will make a difference for these animals. We have made a difference for these animals, and we will continue to make a difference for these animals. We hope that in this conference, you develop the skills that will allow you to make this difference. We hope you found out how to contact the news media. We wanted to teach you how to get the facts about what happens in laboratories. We wanted to show you how to organize effective protests. We wanted you to have all of the skills that will enable you to become an animal researcher's worst nightmare. Someone who cares and someone that quite simply won't give up. Together, we're going to make certain what happens in these torture chambers becomes public. We are going to take the veils of secrecy that have hidden all of this from the public and literally rip them to shreds. We will not allow this to remain hidden. We will not allow the public to hide their heads in the sand anymore. The toll and the cost are simply too high. I don't care and I don't want to see that picture are not good enough. And just like we talked about a few minutes ago, we have seen that when we work together, we can accomplish things that are literally miracles. Right now, there are 300 non-human primates in the jungles of Nepal that have their freedom because of people in this room. And if you had asked me if that was possible before that happened, I might well have laughed in your face. Because of people in this room, as well as dozens of others, 55 monkeys and 125 beagles from a failed animal laboratory got new homes. There's a laboratory in Texas called the Texas Biomedical Research Institute. This is the laboratory that wanted those monkeys from Nepal. They have tried to get the chimps from the foundation in New Mexico, and they were turned down. They have tried to get the primates from Nepal. We made that impossible. And just this last year, at the end of 2012, the NIH was trying to send them 100 more chimps from the New Iberia laboratory. And when we found out that those chimps were going from one bad laboratory to possibly the only one in the United States that might actually have been worse, we decided that that simply wasn't going to happen. And towards the end of 2012, the NIH announced that somehow the money was going to be found and those 100 chimps are going to a sanctuary, not another laboratory. That's the kind of thing that we can do. It's like I said before, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. And it's not only that. If you had asked me last year if we could file one official complaint and force a laboratory to stop using primates entirely, I probably would have suggested that you needed the dosage of your medication increased, because I wouldn't have believed it was possible. But it happened. There are 7 laboratory cages at Penn State's medical school for primates. Those cages are now empty. There is no picture that is better to see than the one that's on the front of the newsletter that we gave you this time, because that is an empty cage. And that's what we need to make, empty cages. In 2012, we were able to put out 93 news stories. We accomplished all of these other things by working with other organizations, by being consistent, and by being focused, and by moving forward. And I know for a fact that we're going to see things just as important this year and the year after that, because we're going to work together, we're going to stay focused, and we're going to continue to make a difference. I think my favorite quote is something you've already heard. It's from Margaret Mead. She said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world, because it is indeed the only thing that ever has." But there's a question that we all have to answer now. This conference is ending. We have about 10 minutes left. We hope that we've given you the tools to make a difference. What are you going to do about that? It's a very simple choice, and there's only 2 options. You can choose to make a difference for the animals that are out there, or you can choose to walk away and turn your back. And I know what the speakers and those that have been here for this conference would tell you. I know what Ken and Anthony and Susan, Bob and Carrie, wherever they wandered off to. all of the people that have been up here sharing their expertise and trying to tell you how to make a difference are going to uniformly tell you one thing. Our lives are dedicated to this, and we're not going away. There's only one thing that's going to get rid of us, and that's when animal experimentation ends. And until that happens, I can tell you one thing for certain. The USDA is the least of the worries for these animal laboratories. They don't need to worry about the USDA. They need to worry about us. Because we're not going away. We're not going to stop. We're not going to leave them alone until the cages are empty. That's all there is to it. There's only one goal that we need to talk about, and that's ending animal experimentation once and for all. When you're making this decision about what you're going to do, when you answer that question, you don't need to address it to me, because it's not going to change much. When you decide on your course of action, think about the animals that are in the laboratories now. Look them in the eye and tell them what you're going to do. Think about the monkeys, the dogs, and the cats, and look into their eyes, see how they're suffering, and you tell them what you're going to do. Think about all of the different things that they suffer. The confinement, the isolation, the pain, the loss, the stress. Think about what it must be like for one of those mother primates that watches her child taken away, and they never see that child again. This doesn't happen once. It happens thousands and thousands of times. Tell her that you're not going to do anything about this. Think about the beagles in the laboratory at HLS, and you tell them, you look them in the eye, and you tell them that you're not going to do anything about this. So the question I have to ask you is, what are you going to do? Are you going to stand up and fight, or are you just going to walk away? There's one reason that I was put on this planet, and that's for this fight. And the only way they're getting me out of this is put me 6 feet under. That's the only way I'm stopping. And that's the kind of commitment that I want to call every single one of you to. You need to make this your life's work. Because if we don't do that, if we don't walk away, if we don't stand together, then centuries from now, this will still be happening. But I can tell you one thing. That's not the case. Because I've gotten to know all of you here this weekend. I know how you think. I know how you feel. I can see it in your eyes. You care about these animals just as much as I do. Just as much as Camille does, as much as Anthony, as much as everyone else that's here. You're going to make a difference. I know you are. And the next time we have one of these conferences, I want you to come back and tell me what you've done. I want you to come back and say, we're going after that laboratory in our town. I want you to say that we've raised money for a primate sanctuary. I want you to say that we've exposed the abuses, that now everybody in our city knows this laboratory is here, and before we got started, nobody had even heard of the place. Because that's how we're going to make a difference. And so the last thing I want to say to you is that all of these animals are waiting for your decision. Their pain, their suffering, and their death is our call to action. We need to stand up, and we need to stand together, and we need to fight for these animals until animal experimentation is simply once and for all ended. Thank you.